defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from the local market. The prosecutor stated coldly. The man only bowed his head. "I just needed strength to live one more day." The courtroom chuckled, but the judge didn't. He had just seen the man's face. Who was he? And why did the judge suddenly freeze in shock? Thomas Riley, 64, was a familiar sight in the shadows of downtown Portland. For over 8 years, he'd been homeless, moving between shelters and doorways, his weathered face partially hidden beneath an untrimmed gray beard and the brim of a faded navy cap. Unlike many who lived on the streets, Thomas rarely spoke to anyone. He carried with him an old military rucksack, its once sharp edges now rounded with wear, straps reinforced with duct tape that needed replacing months ago. Local business owners knew him as the Ghost. He appeared at dawn to collect recyclables, disappeared during daylight hours, and returned only when the streets emptied at night. He never caused trouble, never asked for money, and politely declined most offers of help. What the community didn't know was that Thomas had served in the Marine Corps for 22 years, retiring as a Master Sergeant in 2006. A decorated combat veteran, he'd been deployed to conflicts that most civilians had forgotten or never knew existed. After his retirement, Thomas had built a quiet life with his wife Elizabeth in a small coastal town. They'd saved carefully, invested wisely, and planned to spend their golden years traveling the country in an RV. But in 2015, Elizabeth was diagnosed with an aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Despite having veterans' benefits, a billing error had left them with catastrophic medical debt. Within 18 months, Elizabeth was gone, and Thomas had sold everything to pay her medical bills. "Sometimes it's easier just to disappear," he once told a volunteer at the Veterans Center before he stopped going there altogether. When you've lost your purpose, what's left? On a particularly bitter January morning, with temperatures hovering just above freezing and rain turning to sleet, Thomas hadn't eaten in 2 days. His usual sources of income, collecting cans and occasional odd jobs, had dried up during the harsh winter weather. He entered Wilson's Corner Market, a family-owned store where he sometimes helped unload deliveries in exchange for day-old bread or bruised fruit. But today, Mr. Wilson wasn't working, and his son, who managed the store on Tuesdays, didn't know Thomas. Dizzy from hunger and cold, Thomas slipped a loaf of bread into his coat while the younger Wilson was helping another customer. But the store had recently installed new security cameras, and Thomas's movements were captured clearly on the monitor. "Hey, stop right there," the store manager shouted, already reaching for his phone. "I'm calling the police." Thomas didn't run. He simply stood still, the partially concealed bread visible in his coat. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I haven't eaten since Sunday." Officers arrived within minutes. The younger of the two, Officer Rodriguez, seemed uncomfortable as she placed handcuffs on Thomas's thin wrists. "Are those dog tags?" she asked, noticing the chain around his neck. Thomas nodded slightly. "From another lifetime. Were you really in the service?" Rodriguez asked. "My brother's a Marine. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines," Thomas replied softly. "But that was a long time ago." At the precinct, Thomas was processed like any other offender. His military ID was logged into evidence along with his few possessions. A public defender met briefly with him, more focused on clearing cases than understanding his client's circumstances. "It's a simple misdemeanor theft," the defender explained hastily. "Plead guilty, probably get community service. Maybe a night or two in county if the judge is having a bad day. We'll get through this quick tomorrow morning." When morning came, Thomas was escorted into Municipal Courtroom 3, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now dried stiff with the previous day's rain. The courtroom was nearly empty. A couple of lawyers reviewing documents, a court reporter setting up equipment, and a maintenance worker replacing a flickering light. No character witnesses. No concerned family members, no one waiting to speak on Thomas's behalf. Case number 38-472, State versus Thomas Riley, the clerk announced. Charged with misdemeanor theft under $50. The young prosecutor stood, adjusting his tie unnecessarily. "Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing food items from Wilson's Corner Market yesterday. Given that this appears to be a first offense, the state recommends 40 hours of community service." Judge Samuel Harrington, known throughout the district for his efficiency and no-nonsense approach, barely looked up from the file. At 58, he'd seen thousands of cases like this one, or so he thought. "Mr. Riley, how do you plead?" the judge asked, finally glancing up. "Guilty, Your Honor," Thomas replied softly. "I was hungry and made a mistake." The judge nodded, preparing to issue his routine ruling, when something about the defendant's face caught his attention. Judge Harrington paused, looked down at the file again, then back at Thomas. His expression changed so dramatically that the court reporter stopped typing. The color drained from his face as though he'd seen a ghost. Without explanation, Judge Harrington stood abruptly. The entire courtroom froze in confusion. Judges rarely stand during routine hearings. "Court will take a 15-minute recess," he announced, his voice unusually strained. "The defendant will remain." As the judge exited to his chambers, the prosecutor and public defender exchanged bewildered looks. Thomas simply stared at the floor, either unaware or unconcerned about the unusual turn of events his presence had triggered. What do you think about veterans who serve their country only to end up forgotten on the streets? Stay with us to discover what made the judge freeze in shock when he saw this homeless man's face. In his chambers, Judge Samuel Harrington's hands trembled as he unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk. From it, he withdrew a leather photo album he hadn't opened in years. He flipped through the pages with urgency until he found what he was looking for: a faded photograph taken in Afghanistan in 2004. It showed a group of Marines and embedded civilian contractors standing before a newly constructed school building. The judge, then a civilian infrastructure specialist with the State Department, stood in the front row. And there in the second row, standing tall in his combat uniform, was a younger version of the man who now sat in his courtroom: Master Sergeant Thomas Riley. Judge Harrington activated his computer and entered a secure government database he still had access to from his previous work with the State Department. He typed Thomas Riley, USMC, and waited. The service record that appeared confirmed what he suspected. Master Sergeant Thomas Riley had served multiple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan between 1995 and 2006, working primarily in combat engineering and security operations. He had received numerous commendations, including 2 Purple Hearts and a Silver Star for valor when his unit was ambushed in Helmand Province. But what caught the judge's attention was a specific incident report from March 16, 2004. During a routine diplomatic mission to open a new school, insurgents had attacked the convoy carrying civilian contractors. When the lead vehicle was hit by an IED, Master Sergeant Riley had led a counter-assault, creating a security corridor for the civilians to escape. Among those civilians was Samuel Harrington, whose vehicle had taken direct fire. Riley had personally pulled Harrington from the burning wreckage, shielding him with his own body as they retreated to safety. The report noted that Riley had sustained a gunshot wound to his shoulder during the extraction, but had refused medical evacuation until all civilians were accounted for. "My God," the judge whispered. "It's really him." For years, Judge Harrington had tried to locate the Marine who had saved his life. But in the chaos of that day, with multiple units involved and hasty evacuations, he'd never gotten the man's full name. Just Riley, shouted across the radio communications. By the time Harrington had recovered from his injuries and attempted to find his rescuer, the Marine had been reassigned, and the military bureaucracy had proven impenetrable. While the judge processed this revelation, Thomas sat alone in the courtroom, guarded by a bored bailiff who scrolled through his phone. For 8 years, Thomas had lived on society's margins, invisible to the system he had once sworn to protect. After Elizabeth died, Thomas had spiraled into profound grief, compounded by undiagnosed PTSD. The administrative errors that had plagued his VA benefits had destroyed his faith in the system. When the medical bills became overwhelming, he'd sold their modest home, paid off Elizabeth's expenses, and walked away from everything else: his remaining benefits, his pension, his identity. For years, locals had viewed him as just another homeless person. Shopkeepers watched him suspiciously when he entered their stores. Police regularly moved him along when he stayed too long in one location. Even other homeless individuals kept their distance from the quiet man who sometimes woke shouting from nightmares. Thomas survived by collecting recyclables, occasionally helping unload deliveries at small businesses, and relying on the few soup kitchens that didn't ask questions. He never panhandled, never sought attention, his military training having instilled a self-reliance that persisted even as his circumstances deteriorated. On his darkest nights, Thomas would take out the laminated photograph of Elizabeth that he kept wrapped in plastic, protected from the elements. "Almost time, Lizzie," he would whisper, "just holding on a little longer." Back in his chambers, Judge Harrington made a series of urgent phone calls. First to the VA office, requesting immediate verification of Thomas's current benefit status. Then to Colonel Gregory Martinez, now stationed at the Pentagon, who had commanded the base where both men had been on that fateful day in Afghanistan. "Martinez, it's Sam Harrington. I found him, the Marine who pulled me out at Helmand. He's in my courtroom right now, homeless, charged with stealing bread." The silence on the other end spoke volumes before Martinez responded. "I'm in DC, but I can be there by evening. Don't let him leave, Sam." The judge wrote a personal note on official letterhead. Thomas Riley is not just another defendant. He represents a profound failure of the systems meant to support those who risked everything for their country. Judicial ethics prevented him from dismissing the case outright based on personal connection, but nothing would stop him from ensuring justice took a different path than initially planned. As the recess neared its end, a clerk entered the judge's chambers with an urgent message. Colonel Martinez had already contacted the local Marine Corps office, and representatives were en route to the courthouse. When court resumed, Thomas noticed the change immediately. The judge's demeanor had transformed completely, the professional detachment replaced by something Thomas couldn't quite identify, recognition perhaps, or was it remorse? Before Thomas could process this shift, the proceedings took an unexpected turn. In light of new information regarding the defendant's background, this court will postpone further proceedings pending a full investigation, Judge Harrington announced. The defendant will be released on his own recognizance until tomorrow's hearing. The prosecutor looked confused, but didn't object. Thomas, accustomed to systems making decisions about him without explanation, simply nodded. As Thomas was about to be escorted out, Judge Harrington added, "And see that Mr. Riley receives proper meals and temporary accommodations at the Veterans Center, not the shelter." That evening, a local news blog ran a skeptical headline, "Homeless man's case mysteriously delayed. Sources say judge recognized defendant." The comment section filled with cynical remarks, another street person getting special treatment. If he's really a vet, why doesn't he get benefits instead of stealing? Judges shouldn't play favorites. At the Veterans Center, Thomas encountered suspicion from a volunteer who had seen the article. "A lot of people claim military service when they're in trouble," the young man said, eyeing Thomas warily. "My cousin died in Afghanistan, while guys like you use the uniform to get sympathy." Thomas didn't respond. He simply accepted the clean clothes offered and took a shower for the first time in weeks. That night, he slept on a real bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why, after all this time, someone had looked at him and actually seen him. Have you ever witnessed someone being completely misjudged based solely on appearances? Share your story in the comments below. Someone might need to hear it. The next morning, Thomas was escorted back to the courtroom. Unlike the previous day's nearly empty gallery, today every seat was filled. News cameras waited outside, forbidden from entering, but eager to capture whatever would follow. Thomas's confusion deepened when he noticed his public defender had been replaced by a distinguished older attorney who introduced herself as Catherine Westfield from the Veterans Legal Defense Fund. "Someone's taken an interest in your case, Mr. Riley," she explained, offering no further details. As Thomas took his seat, he heard the courtroom doors open. The audience rose as Judge Harrington entered, but Thomas's attention was drawn to the 4 uniformed Marines who had entered behind the court officers. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Samuel Harrington," the bailiff announced. The proceedings began with unusual formality, the judge's demeanor markedly different from the previous day. "Before we address the charges against Mr. Riley, the court will hear relevant testimony pertaining to the defendant's background and circumstances," Judge Harrington stated. Thomas stared in confusion as Colonel Gregory Martinez approached the witness stand. Although 20 years older than when Thomas had last seen him, Martinez's military bearing remained unmistakable. After being sworn in, Martinez addressed the court with practiced precision. I am Colonel Gregory Martinez, currently stationed at the Pentagon. I have known the defendant, Master Sergeant Thomas Riley, since our deployment to Afghanistan in 2004. The colonel turned to face Thomas directly. This man before you led a security team protecting civilian contractors and diplomatic personnel during the reconstruction efforts. On March 16, 2004, when insurgents attacked our convoy, Master Sergeant Riley, despite being wounded himself, saved the lives of 7 civilians, including a State Department official named Samuel Harrington. Murmurs spread through the courtroom as Martinez continued. That State Department official is now Judge Samuel Harrington of this court. At this revelation, all eyes turned to Judge Harrington, whose professional composure momentarily faltered as he nodded in confirmation. The prosecutor stood, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, while this testimony speaks to the defendant's past character, it doesn't change the fact that he committed theft. Moreover, this creates a clear conflict of interest for the court. If I may continue, Colonel Martinez interrupted. After reviewing Master Sergeant Riley's file, we've discovered significant administrative errors. Due to a system migration in 2016, Thomas Riley's pension and benefits were erroneously terminated when notification letters were sent to an address no longer valid after his wife's passing. He has been entitled to approximately $1,850 per month for the past 8 years, plus medical care for service-related injuries. That totals nearly $178,000 in unpaid benefits. The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Thomas himself looked stunned, his weathered hands gripping the edge of the table. Furthermore, Martinez added, producing a folder, we have documentation from the VA hospital indicating that Master Sergeant Riley has been diagnosed with PTSD, which went untreated due to the benefits error. This medical condition is directly relevant to understanding the circumstances of this case. Judge Harrington addressed Thomas directly for the first time. Mr. Riley, protocol requires that I recuse myself from presiding over a case involving someone with whom I have a personal connection. Judge Eleanor Washington will take over these proceedings. As an African-American woman in her 60s entered the courtroom, Judge Harrington continued. However, before I step down, I want the record to show that on March 16, 2004, the defendant saved my life at great risk to his own. I have spent nearly 2 decades attempting to locate him to express my gratitude. A collective gasp swept through the gallery. Judge Harrington removed his glasses, his formal demeanor softening. I never knew your full name, he said directly to Thomas. Just Riley called out during the chaos. Thomas's voice, when he finally spoke, was rough from disuse. I was just doing my job, sir. You did far more than your job, Harrington responded, and this country has failed to do its job for you. As Judge Harrington stepped down, Judge Washington took the bench. After reviewing the file briefly, she turned to the prosecutor. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, does the state wish to proceed with charges? The young prosecutor, now visibly moved, stood. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Master Sergeant Riley with prejudice. So ordered, Judge Washington responded immediately. Mr. Riley, you are free to go. This court extends its deepest apologies for the miscarriage of justice that has extended far beyond these proceedings. As Thomas stood in shocked silence, the back doors of the courtroom opened again. A woman in her early 40s entered, her eyes searching until they found Thomas. She approached slowly, tears streaming down her face. Uncle Tommy, she said, I'm Jennifer, Elizabeth's niece. We've been searching for you for years. Thomas's composure finally broke, his shoulders sagging as Jennifer embraced him. The first gentle human contact he'd experienced in years that wasn't from police officers placing him in handcuffs. Outside the courtroom, reporters thrust microphones toward Colonel Martinez. This is not just about one veteran, he stated firmly. This is about thousands of Thomas Rileys who fall through cracks in a system they defended. Today, we begin making this right. By afternoon, the story had gone viral. News helicopters hovered over the courthouse as Thomas emerged, clean-shaven and wearing donated clothes, flanked by Colonel Martinez and former Judge Harrington. Mr. Wilson Jr., the store owner who had pressed charges, pushed through reporters to reach Thomas. "I didn't know," he said, visibly shaken. "My father would have recognized you. You used to help with deliveries. I'm ashamed now." Thomas simply nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Within 48 hours, a veterans organization established a fund for Thomas that quickly exceeded $250,000 in donations. Social media erupted with similar stories of veterans who had fallen through bureaucratic cracks, prompting the VA to announce a comprehensive review of terminated benefits cases. In a private moment away from cameras, Judge Harrington finally had the conversation he'd waited 20 years to have. "You pulled me from that burning vehicle with a bullet in your shoulder," he said quietly. "The medics said you refused treatment until they stabilized all the civilians." Thomas shrugged. "You were all my responsibility. You said something to me that day when I was going in and out of consciousness. You said, 'Keep breathing, civilian. Your story isn't finished yet.' Those words kept me alive, kept me fighting through recovery. I became a judge because I wanted to continue serving, to make things right like you showed me that day." Thomas looked at Harrington, no longer seeing the authority figure in robes, but the terrified civilian from his memories. "I'm glad something good came from that day." "Not just something good," Harrington replied. "Everything good in my life since then, my career, my family, my chance to make a difference. It all exists because you didn't leave me behind." For the first time in years, Thomas smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "No one left behind." That wasn't just a motto for me. 3 weeks later, Thomas stood in a VA office wearing a new suit, his military decorations finally displayed properly on his chest. The silver star, 2 purple hearts, and other ribbons telling the story of his service. A Veterans Affairs representative formally presented him with his back benefits and an additional settlement for the administrative error. As cameras captured the moment, Thomas spoke publicly. "I don't want anyone's pity. I just hope that those who come after won't be forgotten like I was." The story transformed from a local human interest piece to a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. Legislators cited Thomas's case when introducing bills to reform the benefit system. A famous photograph of Thomas from his service days, pulling an injured Afghan child to safety during a firefight, circulated again, this time alongside the image of him standing trial for stealing bread. The juxtaposition became a powerful symbol that forced uncomfortable questions about national priorities. Thomas Riley, who had been invisible for 8 years, had suddenly become impossible to ignore. What was a moment when you saw justice arrive late but powerfully? Share your story in the comments to give someone else hope. 4 months later, Thomas moved into Veterans Village, a supportive housing community just outside Portland. His small apartment, the first place he could call home since Elizabeth's death, contained few possessions but featured a wall dedicated to photographs. Elizabeth on their wedding day, his old unit in Afghanistan, and a new image of him with Judge Harrington and Colonel Martinez at a veterans recognition ceremony. Thomas declined most interview requests but agreed to speak at local high schools about military service and the challenges veterans face upon returning home. His quiet dignity and straightforward manner resonated particularly with troubled teenagers, who found in him neither judgment nor condescension, just honest accounts of both heroism and hardship. Each afternoon, Thomas could be found volunteering at the downtown Veterans Outreach Center, helping others navigate the complex bureaucracy of benefits he had once abandoned. "The system is flawed," he would tell them, "but giving up on it isn't the answer." Outside the county courthouse, a new bronze plaque was installed. "Justice means seeking those who have been forgotten." Alongside this inscription stood a relief sculpture depicting a Marine carrying an injured civilian to safety, with no names mentioned. Just the silent understanding of sacrifice recognized. During the dedication ceremony, the mayor announced the creation of an annual fund to provide legal assistance specifically for homeless veterans, named the Riley Initiative. A middle school student who had attended one of Thomas's talks wrote an essay for the school newspaper. Not everyone living on the street is there by choice. Some people carry invisible wounds from battles we'll never see. The essay won a statewide competition and was read aloud at a city council meeting addressing homelessness policy. Thomas maintained a friendship with former Judge Harrington, occasionally joining his family for weekend barbecues. During one such gathering, Harrington's teenage daughter asked Thomas if he was angry about being homeless for so long. Thomas considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't need anyone's anger or pity. I just needed someone to see me, not the homeless man I became, but the person I always was." On Veterans Day, Thomas stood before a crowd at the Marine Corps base, wearing his dress uniform for the first time in a decade. When asked to make remarks, he spoke briefly but powerfully. "I once protected this country. Now this country remembers to protect me. Kindness is never too late. It just needs someone who recognizes where it's due." As he stepped down from the podium, the assembled military personnel, from young recruits to aging veterans, rose in silent salute. Thomas straightened his posture and returned the gesture, his eyes clear and dignified, no longer looking down at the ground, but forward toward the future. Justice may arrive late, but it is never truly absent. Don't give up when you're doing what's right. What moment have you stood firm when the world stood against you? Share it now in the comments below. Subscribe to Bold Thread to see more stories where truth and justice ultimately prevail. Share this video with someone who needs faith in doing the right thing.